The Danube River. Winter, 170 AD. Marcus Aurelius is sitting inside a military tent on the northern frontier of the Roman Empire. Outside, temperatures are below freezing. The river is partially iced over. Somewhere beyond the tree line, Germanic tribes are massing for another assault on Roman territory, the deepest breach of the frontier in 3 centuries. Inside the tent, by the light of an oil lamp, he is writing, not military orders, not correspondence to the Senate, something no one was supposed to read, something he was writing for himself alone, in the margins of one of the worst periods any human being in recorded history has ever faced. At this exact moment, a plague is killing thousands of people per week across the empire he is responsible for. His co-emperor and closest ally died 4 years ago. Several of his children are already dead. His generals are struggling. His treasury is under pressure that would collapse any modern government within months. And he is writing about how to keep his mind steady, not how to win, not how to survive, how to stay unbreakable. That document survived. We call it the Meditations. And what most people who read it miss completely is that it is not a philosophy book. It is not a collection of wisdom for quiet afternoons and morning routines. It is a technical manual, a precise, structured, field-tested system for building a mind that pressure cannot destroy. Marcus Aurelius was not born unbreakable. No one is. He built it, practice by practice, morning by morning, crisis by crisis, until the system became structural, until it was no longer something he did, but something he was. That system has 5 parts. We are going through all of them today. By the end of this video, you will have the complete code, not as inspiration, as architecture. Let's build. Chapter 2, The Man Behind the Code. Why pressure reveals everything. Before you can understand what Marcus Aurelius built, you need to understand what he was building it against. Most people who encounter Marcus Aurelius encounter him through a single image: the philosopher emperor, the wise ruler, the man who wrote beautiful thoughts about virtue and impermanence in the quiet hours of the night. That image is not wrong, but it is dangerously incomplete, because it removes the weight. And without the weight, the code makes no sense. Marcus Aurelius became emperor in 161 AD at the age of 39. He had spent 23 years being groomed for the position under his adoptive father, Antoninus Pius, a period of almost uninterrupted peace and fiscal surplus. The empire he was handed was the richest, most stable, most administratively sophisticated political structure in the Western world. Within 2 years, it started coming apart. First came the Parthian War in the east, a massive military campaign that stretched Roman legions to their operational limits and consumed treasury resources at a rate the empire had not seen in decades. The war was eventually won, but what the legions brought back from the east was worse than any defeat. A plague, the Antonine Plague, almost certainly smallpox, entered the empire through the returning armies in 166 AD and spread with a speed that no one had any framework to understand, contain, or stop. At its peak, it was killing up to 2,000 people per day in Rome alone. Over the following 15 years, it would kill between 5 and 10 million people across the empire. Agricultural workers dying in the fields, tax revenues collapsing, trade networks fracturing, the entire labor foundation of the Roman economy dissolving in real time. And simultaneously, not sequentially, simultaneously, the northern frontier collapsed. Germanic tribes crossed the Danube and pushed into Roman territory for the first time in centuries. Marcus Aurelius, a man whose natural inclination was philosophy and administration, was forced to become a military commander. He spent the last decade of his life living in military camps on the northern frontier, sleeping in tents, eating campaign rations, managing a war with one hand and an empire in crisis with the other. He never got a break. There was no period of recovery between crises. No moment when the pressure lifted and he could reset. The emergencies overlapped, compounded, and persisted for nearly 2 decades without interruption. This is the environment in which the Meditations was written. Not in a study, not in a palace. In military tents, by lamplight, in the hours before dawn, when the camp was still quiet and the demands of the day had not yet begun. What Marcus Aurelius was doing in those hours was not journaling in the modern sense. He was not processing his feelings. He was not practicing gratitude. He was engineering his own mind, deliberately, systematically, with the same precision he applied to military strategy and imperial administration. And Meditations is not organized the way a philosophy book is organized. There is no argument that builds from chapter to chapter. No thesis defended across 12 books. It reads, to the casual observer, like a collection of disconnected observations. That is because it was never meant to be read as a book. It was a practice log, the written record of a man running the same mental drills in slightly different forms, day after day, under conditions of extreme and unrelenting pressure. When you read it that way, as engineering documentation rather than philosophical literature, 5 distinct practices emerge with remarkable clarity. 5 specific things Marcus Aurelius did, repeatedly and deliberately, to maintain a mind that the weight of his circumstances could not break. Not 5 pieces of advice. 5 load-bearing structures. The difference matters. Advice tells you what to do. Load-bearing structures hold weight whether you are thinking about them or not. That is what Marcus Aurelius built. And that is what this code delivers. The first practice begins before sunrise. Chapter 3, Practice 1. The armor you build before the world wakes up. Book 5 of the Meditations opens with one of the most honest sentences Marcus Aurelius ever wrote. He is lying in bed before dawn. The body wants to stay horizontal. The mind is already offering reasons why today could start a little later. And he writes the thought down, not to validate it, but to catch it. Then he answers it with a question that cuts straight through the comfort. Are you born for this? Or for something that requires you to get up? That is not motivational writing. That is a man engineering his own mind before the day has a chance to do it for him. Marcus Aurelius understood something precise. The first decision of the day is architectural. A man who negotiates with his own discipline before sunrise arrives at every subsequent moment already weakened. A man who rises without negotiation arrives with a pattern of non-negotiation already running, below the level of conscious effort, structurally, like load-bearing steel. The pre-dawn practice had 2 components. The first was expectation. In Book 2, Passage 1, he writes that upon waking, he would prepare himself for the people and events the day would bring, the difficult, the ungrateful, the hostile, not as complaint, as preparation. The Stoics called this premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. Its purpose was surgical. Eliminate the gap between expectation and reality before that gap could generate shock. Because under pressure, shock is not free. It carries an additional payload on top of the event itself. The weight of feeling that this should not be happening. That secondary weight is what breaks people, not the crisis. The surprise of the crisis. Marcus Aurelius removed that surprise every morning before it could form. The second component was pre-commitment. In Book 3, Passage 16, he returns, as he does consistently across all 12 books, to the question of his own values and his own purpose. Not philosophically, operationally. He was confirming, before the demands began, who he was going to be that day. Because a decision made in clarity, before pressure arrives, is structurally different from a decision made inside the pressure. The former is made by your best self. The latter is made by whoever you become when the weight arrives. and that person is less reliable than you think. He pre-committed every morning, so that when the day tried to reshape him, and it always tried, the decision had already been made. This is the first practice, not a routine, a daily act of construction, the deliberate building of a mind that the day cannot break because it was already fortified before the day began. The pre-dawn hours are not for rest, they are for armor. Chapter 4, Practice 2, the clarity that comes from looking. Death in the eye. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding a single thought. Marcus Aurelius spent his entire life running toward it. In Book 2, Passage 14, he writes that a man who has lived 40 years has seen everything that has been and everything that will be. The same patterns, the same cycles, the same rise and collapse of things that seemed permanent. And in Book 4, Passage 17, he goes further. He lists names: Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, men who moved the world, and asks where they are now. The answer is always the same: gone. Completely and permanently gone. This was not morbidity. This was a precision instrument. The Stoics called this practice memento mori, the deliberate contemplation of death. But in Marcus Aurelius, it operated with a specific mechanical purpose that most readers miss entirely. He was not using it to generate gratitude or philosophical perspective. He was using it to cut through the noise of the immediate and expose what actually mattered underneath. Here is the mechanics. When a crisis arrives, a financial loss, a professional failure, a betrayal, the mind immediately floods with urgency. Everything feels equally critical. The emotional weight of the moment makes it nearly impossible to distinguish between what genuinely matters and what only feels like it matters because it is happening right now. Memento mori dissolves that flood in seconds. If this moment were your last, which of these things would still carry weight? The answer arrives fast, and it is almost always clarifying to the point of being brutal. Most of what felt urgent disappears. What remains is real. Marcus Aurelius used this lens constantly, not as an exercise reserved for quiet philosophical moments, but as an active decision-making tool deployed in the middle of maximum pressure. In Book 6, Passage 2, he writes that a man should conduct himself in every act of life as if it could be his last. That instruction is not about living dramatically. It is about maintaining access to clarity when the noise is loudest. The man who can see through the immediate to what actually matters is not just philosophically superior to the man who cannot. He is operationally superior. He makes fewer decisions driven by panic. He wastes less energy on things that will not matter in a year. He moves with a precision that looks, from the outside, like unusual calm, but is actually something more useful than calm. It is clarity under fire, built by looking at the one thing most people refuse to look at directly. Practice 2 does not make you indifferent to life. It makes you accurate about it. The third practice is where Marcus Aurelius is something that sounds simple and is extraordinarily difficult. He changes the meaning of what is happening without lying to himself about what it is. Chapter 5, Practice 3, the art of seeing clearly when everything is on fire. In Book 7, Passage 9, Marcus Aurelius writes something that looks, on the surface, like a philosophical observation. Read it carefully, and it is a surgical tool. He writes that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, not as comfort, as diagnosis. What Marcus Aurelius identified with a precision that modern cognitive psychology would not formally describe for another 18 centuries is that human beings do not respond to events. They respond to their interpretation of events. The event itself arrives naked, without meaning. The mind clothes it instantly, automatically, and almost always with more weight than the event itself carries. A business deal collapses. That is the event. What the mind adds is the story. This means I am failing. This means the trajectory is wrong. This means recovery is impossible. The story is not the event, but it feels indistinguishable from it. And it is the story, not the event, that generates the emotional response that then drives the decision that then shapes the outcome. Marcus Aurelius called the practice of separating event from interpretation the discipline of assent. In Book 8, Passage 7, he returns to it with specific instruction. When something arrives that feels overwhelming, pause before the interpretation forms. See the event as it actually is, stripped of the narrative the mind wants to attach to it. Then choose, deliberately, what meaning to assign. This is not positive thinking. Positive thinking replaces an accurate negative interpretation with an inaccurate positive one. What Marcus Aurelius practiced was more demanding and more useful. He replaced automatic interpretation, which is almost always distorted by fear, pride, or urgency, with chosen interpretation. Accurate, clear, and selected for its utility rather than its emotional comfort. He applied this under conditions that make the average modern crisis look manageable. When the plague death tolls arrived, when the frontier reports were worse than expected, when his own generals failed him, in every case, the practice was the same. Strip the event back to what it actually is. Then decide what it means. Not what it feels like it means, but what a clear mind, operating without panic, would determine it means. In Book 10, Passage 3, he writes that the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. That line has been quoted so many times it has lost its edge. Restore the edge. He is not offering encouragement. He is describing the output of a mind that has successfully separated event from interpretation and chosen a meaning that converts obstacle into direction. That conversion does not happen automatically. It is the product of a trained discipline applied at the exact moment when the untrained mind is flooding with noise. Practice 3 is the practice of choosing what things mean before the automatic mind chooses for you. In a world where most people are being driven by interpretations they never consciously selected, that ability is not a philosophical nicety. It is a competitive advantage of the highest order. The fourth practice takes everything built so far and turns it into fuel. Chapter 6, Practice 4. Turning pressure into power before IT turns into collapse in Book 5. Passage 20. Marcus Aurelius writes that the cucumber that meets resistance in its growth does not complain about the resistance. It grows around it, through it, using the very obstacle as the condition for its own development. He was not writing about cucumbers. He was documenting a practice he had been running for years, one that transformed the relationship between pressure and performance at a fundamental level. Not the relationship most people have, where pressure depletes and performance degrades. The inverse, where pressure becomes the raw material from which capacity is built. The practice has a precise mechanism, and understanding the mechanism is what separates the people who can apply it from the people who read it as inspiration and feel good for 48 hours before reverting to their default response to difficulty. Here is the mechanism. The untrained mind treats obstacles as interruptions. Something was supposed to happen. The obstacle prevented it. Energy is now spent on the gap between what was supposed to happen and what did. That gap, the resistance to what is where most human energy goes to die, not in the obstacle itself. In the argument with the obstacle, Marcus Aurelius eliminated the argument. In Book 10, Passage 16, he writes that a fire fed by obstacles grows larger, not smaller. The obstacles are not problems to be solved before the work can begin. They are the work, the material, the condition that, properly engaged, produces something the absence of obstacles never could. He applied this with a specificity that the motivational version of this idea always loses. It was not a general attitude of positivity toward difficulty. It was a trained cognitive redirect deployed at the moment of impact that converted the energy of resistance into the energy of engagement. The question was never, why is this happening? The question was always, what does this make possible that was not possible before? That question sounds simple. Under real pressure, the kind Marcus Aurelius faced daily for 19 years, it is one of the hardest redirects a human mind can execute, because the default is so loud. The sense of injustice, the instinct to resist, the pull toward explaining why the obstacle should not exist. All of it arrives immediately and at full volume. Practice 4 is the deliberate override of that default, trained until it is faster than the default, until the redirect happens before the argument can form. In Book 5, Passage 8, Marcus Aurelius writes that the art of living is more like wrestling than dancing. It requires a man to stand ready and firm to meet whatever comes, even the unforeseen. That readiness is not temperamental. It is not something some people have and others do not. It is built through the repeated practice of meeting resistance, not with argument, but with engagement, of asking not why this is happening, but what this makes possible. Done consistently, over time, this practice does something that no amount of motivation can replicate. It makes a man genuinely difficult to stop, not because the obstacles disappear, because the man who meets them has been trained at the level of automatic response to convert their energy rather than absorb their weight. Pressure stops being a threat. It becomes a resource. The fifth and final practice is the one that holds all the others together when everything is collapsing at once. Chapter 7, Practice 5, the anchor that holds when everything else is breaking. In Book 3, Passage 10, Marcus Aurelius writes something that every man under sustained pressure needs to hear. Confine yourself to the present, not as a mindfulness instruction, as a survival mechanism. Here is the problem Marcus Aurelius was solving. A man facing sustained pressure, the kind that does not arrive once and leave, but compounds across months and years without relief, is not just fighting the present crisis. He is fighting the accumulated weight of every past crisis that did not fully resolve, and the anticipated weight of every future crisis that has not yet arrived. The present moment carries the emotional load of everything before it and everything after it simultaneously. That load is not manageable. No mind, regardless of its capacity, can bear the full weight of a 19-year crisis all at once. Marcus Aurelius knew this, and he built a practice specifically designed to prevent it. In Book 8, Passage 36, he writes that it is enough to do good now, even if it will be forgotten. In Book 2, Passage 14, he returns to the same instruction from a different angle, that a man's life is a point in time, his existence a flux, his perception clouded. What he can control is this moment, only this moment. And only this moment requires his full attention and full energy. The practice was not passive acceptance. It was active containment. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to draw a boundary around the present with the same deliberateness he brought to every other aspect of his mental practice. The past was fixed. No energy spent there beyond what produced useful learning. The future was uncertain. No energy spent there beyond what produced useful preparation. Everything else, the guilt, the dread, the accumulated exhaustion of years of unrelenting pressure, was outside the boundary. Not denied, contained. What remained inside the boundary was always manageable. A single decision, a single conversation, a single morning. The present moment, stripped of the weight of everything surrounding it, is almost always survivable. The present moment loaded with the past and the future simultaneously almost never feels that way. This is why men break under sustained pressure, even when no single moment within that pressure is objectively unsurvivable. They are not breaking under the weight of the present. They are breaking under the accumulated weight of everything they are carrying from before and everything they are anticipating from ahead. Practice 5 puts that weight down. Not permanently. Deliberately, repeatedly, as many times as necessary. Every time the mind reaches backward into regret or forward into dread, the redirect returns it to now. What is required of me in this moment? Only this moment. In Book 9, Passage 6, Marcus Aurelius writes that a man should not disturb himself with imaginations, but let him limit himself to the actual and ask himself whether he can bear it. And always he will find that he can. Always. Not because the present is easy, because the present is finite, and a finite weight, met with a mind that has been trained to carry only what belongs to this moment, is always bearable. 5 practices, each one a load-bearing structure, each one built through repetition until it operates below the level of conscious effort. Together, they form something that is more than the sum of their parts. That is what the final block is about. Chapter 8. The Code Complete. What happens when all 5 practices run together? 5 practices. Written in a military tent, by a man who had no guarantee he would survive the winter. It is worth stopping here and being precise about what Marcus Aurelius actually built, because the motivational version of this story always stops one level short of what matters. Each practice, applied in isolation, produces real results. The pre-dawn armor makes the day more manageable. Memento mori produces clarity under pressure. The discipline of assent reduces the cost of misinterpretation. The obstacle redirect converts resistance into fuel. The present anchor prevents accumulated weight from becoming collapse. These are not small things. Any one of them, applied consistently, separates a man from the majority of people around him who are running on default responses to everything life delivers. But Marcus Aurelius did not practice them in isolation. He ran all 5 simultaneously, as an integrated system, every day, for nearly 2 decades. And what happens when 5 load-bearing practices run together, reinforcing each other continuously, is categorically different from what any single practice produces alone. The pre-dawn armor ensures the other 4 practices are available when needed, because a mind that has already won the first negotiation of the day arrives at every subsequent moment with its discipline intact. Memento mori keeps the signal clear by continuously stripping away noise, so that when the discipline of assent is applied, it is working with accurate information rather than distorted urgency. The discipline of assent ensures that the obstacle redirect is applied to the event as it actually is, not to the story the mind has constructed around it. And the present anchor ensures that none of the energy generated by the other 4 practices leaks into the past or the future, where it cannot produce anything useful. The system is self-reinforcing. Each practice makes the others more effective. And like all systems that compound, the returns are not linear. They accelerate. This is what Marcus Aurelius meant when he wrote, in Book 6, Passage 7, that the impediment to action advances action, not just in individual moments, but across an entire life. A man running this system under pressure does not merely survive the pressure. He is changed by it in ways that make him more capable of handling the next pressure and the one after that. The capacity builds, the responses sharpen, the defaults improve. This is not a metaphor. It is a description of what actually happens when a philosophical practice is applied with the consistency and precision that Marcus Aurelius applied to his. The man who emerged from 19 years of unrelenting crisis was not diminished by it. He was, by every documented account, more capable at the end than at the beginning. The Meditations written in his final years on the Danube frontier are more precise, more direct, and more structurally sound than the earlier books. The pressure did not wear him down. It built him up. That is the output of the complete code, not survival, construction. And here is what makes this available to you in a way that it was not available to previous generations. Marcus Aurelius left the documentation. Every practice, described in his own words, in the order he applied them, in the conditions under which he tested them. The Meditations is not a book about what he believed. It is a record of what he did, daily, under maximum pressure, for nearly 2 decades. You are not being asked to trust a philosophy. You are being shown a system with a 19-year performance record under the hardest conditions any human being in the Western world has ever faced. The code is complete. The question that remains is the only one that has ever mattered. We began in a tent on the Danube. Winter 170 AD. A man sitting by lamplight, writing in a journal no one was supposed to read, in the middle of the worst sustained crisis any leader in the Western world has ever faced. A plague consuming his empire. A war consuming his frontier. Loss consuming his personal life. And he is writing, not about escape, not about relief, not about how to make the weight smaller, about how to become the kind of man the weight cannot break. That man was not born. He was built. Practice by practice, morning by morning, crisis by crisis. 5 load-bearing structures, reinforced daily until they became structural, until they were no longer something he did, but something he was. Practice 1. Build the armor before the world wakes up. Win the first negotiation of the day before the day begins. Practice 2. Use mortality as a lens, not a fear. Strip the noise and find what actually matters underneath. Practice 3. Choose what things mean before the automatic mind chooses for you. Separate the event from the interpretation. Practice 4. Convert resistance into fuel. Make pressure the raw material of capacity, not the enemy of it. Practice 5. Confine yourself to the present. Carry only what belongs to this moment. Put everything else down. 5 practices. 1 system. Tested under conditions that would collapse any modern institution, any modern government, any modern mind running on default responses to difficulty. Marcus Aurelius closed his journal that winter morning on the Danube, set down his stylus, and walked out of the tent into the freezing pre-dawn air to face whatever the day had prepared for him. He was ready. Not because the day was going to be manageable, because he was no longer the kind of man who needed it to be. That is what the code builds, not a life without pressure, a mind that pressure cannot break. Now here is the only question that matters. You have the code. All 5 practices, documented by the man who built them, tested in conditions you will never face, available to you right now in a book that has been sitting on shelves for 2,000 years, waiting to be read as what it actually is. What you do with it is the only variable left. If this video changed the way you think about Marcus Aurelius, about pressure, and about what an unbreakable mind actually requires, subscribe to this channel. New videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And if you know someone who is under pressure right now, someone who needs this more than they need another motivational quote, share this video with them, not as inspiration, as a tool, the Stoic compound, where philosophy meets prosperity. And one final question for you. Drop it in the comments below. Of the 5 practices, which one do you need most right now? The pre-dawn armor, the mortality lens, the discipline of ascent, the obstacle redirect, or the present anchor? Tell us, because the answer reveals more about where you are than most people are willing to admit. And this is a community that does not look away from that.